Heidi St. Welcome to Straight Talk.
Thank you for having me, Laurel. It's really great to be here.
Well, let me ask you, as a Republican, why did you decide to challenge the incumbent Republican Congresswoman Jaime Herrera Beutler?
I decided to challenge her because we need a true conservative voice in Congress. And for several years now, I've watched as Mrs. Herrera Beutler has voted for things that I know the constituents of Washington, Southwest Washington, really want. For example, the border wall around our southern border desperately needs protection. It's occurred to me as I've watched her voting that she votes more like a Democrat, particularly fiscally. And I think it's time for new eyes on the situation, a fresh voice for Southwest Washington to bring real conservative values to the forefront again to represent the people here.
And why, of all the 9 candidates on the ballot, and again, the top 2 move on to the general election, why of all 9 do you think you're best suited to represent the 3rd District in Southwest Washington?
Well, I think if people are looking for a true conservative voice in Congress, I am that voice. I'm the only true conservative. I'm running against a Democrat who has communist viewpoints. I'm running against another person who claims to be a Republican but has absolutely no record of voting for conservative values at all, and in fact leans towards socialism. And I'm running against Jaime Herrera Beutler, who votes more often with the Democrats than almost any other Republican in Congress. And so I'm running to be a true conservative voice for Southwest Washington.
And I also asked another conservative frontrunner in the race, I think you referred to him, Joe Kent, this question. Do you think Joe Biden won the 2020 election?
I think that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. That it seems to me that he's the president of the United States of America. The question that we're really all alluding to is whether or not we have fraud in our voting system. And listen, I've been a citizen of Washington State for a long time. I remember the election of Dino Rossi here. I remember, and I'm sure you do too, Laurel, the hanging Chads from Florida. We do have fraud in our election system, but I'm much more concerned at low voter turnout and in going back to voter integrity and voter ID. And so those are going to be the issues that I would focus on.
You mentioned this, you kind of inferred this in one of your answers earlier, but you said you would drop out of the race if one of the candidates was endorsed by Donald Trump. And he did endorse your opponent, Joe Kent. So why didn't you keep your promise and drop out and instead decide to stay in the race?
Yeah, that's a great question because it lets me highlight the fact that I thought, like many people, probably including President Trump, that Joe Kent was an actual conservative when in fact he voted for Bernie Sanders in the Oregon primaries in 2020. 2020 wasn't very long ago. So this is a guy that registered in Oregon in 2012 as a Democrat, and now he wants to, and so 10 years a Democrat in Portland, Oregon, and now he wants to represent my family and the district that I live in and where my businesses are as a conservative in Congress. I don't believe he's a conservative. And at the time, I didn't know these facts about Mr. Kent. I assumed he was a lifelong conservative like I am. When I was a child, my granddad took me campaigning for Ronald Reagan. I love this country and I love the principles of limited freedom and limited or more freedom and limited government. And so I'm staying in the race again to give Southwest Washington a true conservative voice. I don't believe Mr. Kent to be a conservative.
We heard him say earlier in this show that he voted for Donald Trump in the general election. He only voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary to try to put up the weaker candidate against Trump. And he says he was actively working to get Trump reelected in 2020 when he says you were not.
Oh, no, he's completely wrong. I was actually fired from my literary agency for my support of President Trump. I have been an outspoken supporter of President Trump, probably got more people to the polls on behalf of President Trump than Joe Kent could ever dream of doing. And I'm not buying his line about voting for Bernie Sanders so that he could help President Trump. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. And besides, when he put that vote in for Bernie Sanders, claiming he was trying to help President Trump, Bernie had already dropped out of the race and endorsed Joe Biden. So the story doesn't hold water. I think his campaign was shocked to find out that he had in fact voted for a socialist, came up with the story, and the story's not working for me.
Well, let's turn to some kitchen table issues, and a big one is inflation. Polls show it's become a top concern for Washington voters. What plan would you support for a post-pandemic economic recovery?
Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is stop with these crippling regulations. Under the Biden administration, we are at somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 billion in regulations and government handouts. Thomas Sowell said that inflation is a quiet but effective way for the government to transfer resources from the people to itself without raising taxes. And that's what you're seeing happening, except for we're getting hit with a double whammy because they're raising taxes. Listen, we should be cutting taxes. As a business owner, I would like to see the regulations lifted and taxes rolled back so that we can unleash American ingenuity again. And I believe if we can do that, we will see the economy coming back. But we are in a recession, and I think it's going to be a rocky ride for about the next 12 to 15 months.
And another top issue for a lot of people, Americans and Washingtonians, you've said you are unapologetically pro-life. If elected and it came up for a vote in Congress, would you support a federal ban on abortion?
So I am 100% unapologetically pro-life. I have been one of the leading voices in the pro-life movement for many, many years. But I would not support a federal ban on abortion. And let me tell you why. The Supreme Court of the United States just reversed Roe v. Wade, which was the right thing to do on 100 different levels. I have huge moral problems with the taking of an innocent human life, which is what abortion is. But it is not the role of the federal government to either permit abortion or to ban abortion. And if we want that to happen from a governmental standpoint, what we need is a constitutional amendment. According to the 10th Amendment, if an issue is not given directly spoken to in the Constitution, it becomes a states' rights issue. And that's what SCOTUS did. They rightly ruled that this was never something for the federal government to be involved in, and they kicked it back to the states. I believe that if we go ahead now and we say, well, we want a federal ban on abortion, we're going to wind up with the same problem that we've seen for the last 50 years, only on the other side. I'd love to see a constitutional amendment that protects life. In our Declaration of Independence, we stated that we have all been given certain unalienable rights, and the first one is life. It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the wrong way is a federal ban on abortion. That's the wrong way to protect life.
And since you believe in states' rights, abortion is legal in Washington state, and Democrats want to protect that right. Would you support overturning Washington's Reproductive Privacy Act, which became law in 1991 at the legislative level?
If it's a states' rights issue and we're talking about Washington state becoming anything but a sanctuary state for abortion, I would support it. I am a pro-life conservative. I believe in protecting all life. I think we should protect the life of a mother and her baby, that we should never take one life to prefer another life. So we should always care for both a mother and her child. So to me, this is, again, it's a states' rights issue. If this comes before the state legislature, I would lend my voice in support of the unborn and in defense of life.
Let's talk about education. I know that's important to you. You have 7 children. You've homeschooled your children. As an elected congressional member, would you support public schools?
Absolutely. I think our public schools need support, but I'll tell you what we don't want is the federal government meddling in education. And that's what we're seeing happening. The Department of Education, again, this is not in the Constitution. This is not the role of the federal government. There are at least 33 agencies, federal government agencies, that leave a lot of us scratching our head going, where is that in the Constitution? And so I believe in school choice. I would love to see that happen at a state level. And I would like to see the federal government stop giving grants to things like critical race theory and stop propping up crazy woke gender ideologies, telling children that there are more than 2 genders and that they could be a narwhal whale by Friday if they wanted to be. We have got to start getting back to teaching our kids reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's what our public schools are for. They're not there to indoctrinate our children. And it grieves me as a mother and a grandmother to see how far our public schools have fallen from the original role of educating our children so that they could be a success in the marketplace, not in the marketplace of woke social experimental ideas.
There's a new poll in Washington state showing a majority of Washingtonians would support a ban on assault weapons. Would you support a ban on those kinds of firearms?
Well, first we have to decide what an assault weapon is, right? No one can agree. Listen, I'm going to be a defender of the Constitution. The Second Amendment guarantees us the right to self-defense, and it says that the right of an American citizen to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I would like to see the conversation move to why we are having mass shootings in this country. Why do we have such a high fatherless rate? Why is the suicide rate so high? We keep talking about fruit issues and we don't want to get to the root issue. And I do not believe that disarming honest, hardworking American citizens who want the right to defend themselves will ever be the solution to gun violence in our country. I think that there are lots of solutions we can talk about, like allowing teachers to carry if they would like to, but disarming the American people under the guise of banning assault weapons, I think is a very bad idea.
So if we were able to define assault weapons like the type that have been used in mass shootings, you still would not favor a ban?
No, again, I believe in the Constitution saying that the right of an American citizen to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You know, the moment we start saying, well, this weapon is a good weapon and that weapon is not a good weapon, pretty soon you're just taking one more step to disarming the American people. And now pretty soon you're Australia, you're New Zealand. And I don't think that the founding fathers ever had that in mind. They were escaping tyranny. They knew what would happen if the government ever had the opportunity to tyrannize its people. They came from tyranny, and they put the Second Amendment into our Constitution to protect future generations of Americans from governmental tyranny. That's why it's there.
As Clark County and Vancouver have grown, we've seen crime go up. What plan would you support to help reduce crime in your district?
Well, we understand that crime is terrible in Southwest Washington, absolutely climbing just like it is in the Portland metropolitan area. This is not a federal issue, but I would like to see us have conversations about what's happening. Most of the issues that you see with rising crime are coming from our state legislatures. Olympia is a woke, embarrassing mess right now who are limiting the role and what police officers can do, how they can pursue a criminal, for example. And so what are we seeing? We're emboldening criminals. We see this with people setting up drug camps. You can't park your car overnight on Mill Plain right now without having your catalytic converter stolen. We've got huge issues. Our jails are turning people away. Our prosecutors are refusing to prosecute criminals. And so what are they doing? They're committing more and more crimes. But again, this is an issue for the state and for the state legislatures, not necessarily a federal government issue.
We're about out of time, Heidi. What message would you like to leave with voters?
You know what? I have so much hope for Southwest Washington. I love this area. My husband and I have been married for 33 years. We've raised our children here. Our grandchildren are being raised here. We have a leadership crisis in Southwest Washington. We have a leadership crisis from our school boards all the way to the federal government, from STEM to Stern. And I am running to give the people of Southwest Washington a true voice, to come home, to listen to their concerns, to put our heads together around a table and start coming up with ideas that move the needle, that actually bring hope and prosperity back to the citizens of Southwest Washington. I've been going back and forth to Olympia and to Washington, D.C. to talk about the issues of limited government and freedom for over 17 years. And I would like to take my voice to be a voice for freedom and limited government on behalf of the citizens of Southwest Washington to Washington, D.C. and represent them in Congress.
Heidi St. John, thank you for joining us here on Straight Talk.
Thank you for having me.